The night I stopped fighting for my marriage, I was standing in a lodge doorway in the Allegheny Hills, watching my wife fold herself into another man's arms in front of a fireplace. Same pose as the photograph.
Stay like this forever.
Same easy laugh. 40 people in that room, and not
It's
one of
perfect,
them
isn't
looked
it?
surprised. In my jacket pocket was a folded index card I'd been carrying for 11 days. Her handwriting, 4 words, and a date from 14 months before any of this started. Rule 3. Nothing in writing. I spend my life finding cracks in things that look solid. And I still hadn't found rules 1 and 2. My name is Hollis. I'm 51 years old, and for 26 years I have inspected bridges for the state of Ohio. Deck joints, bearing pads, fatigue cracks, and steel you can't see from the road. I've crawled under structures on a rope harness in February with ice in my mustache, tapping a 2-pound hammer against a girder and listening to what comes back. A good weld rings. A bad one thuds. I keep field notebooks. Orange covers, spiral bound, numbered in marker on the spine. Date at the top of every page, weather on the second line, one honest sentence about what I found. I was on notebook 61. I have never thrown a single one away, and my wife used to say that was either the most romantic thing about me or the most exhausting, depending on the day. Renata was 44. I met her at a pre-bid meeting in a county annex building with bad fluorescent lights, back when she was still doing project coordination before she moved over to healthcare logistics. 12 men in that room, and she was the only one who asked me a question that wasn't about money. She asked what the river does to appear in the spring. Nobody had ever asked me that in a conference room before. I'd been alone 11 years by then. Quiet house, good truck, a 2013 Silverado with 214,000 miles on it. Renata brought noise back in with her. She burned toast every single morning and blamed the toaster every single morning. She left the porch light on for me even when I was standing right beside her out of habit because she liked the way the house looked from the driveway with somebody expected home. On the morning of our wedding, before anybody else was awake, I got down on the kitchen floor with a marking awl and scratched our initials into the underside of the table. Nobody would ever see it. That was the point. I had spent my whole working life caring about the parts of a structure nobody looks at because those are the parts that hold. We refinanced the house on Cresswell Street 2 years in, $312,000, 21 years left on it. Small brick place with a bad back step I kept meaning to pour. There was a garden she never weeded and I never mentioned. Our 5th anniversary was coming up on October the 11th, and I had already put money down on 3 nights at a lake house with a dock. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I was happy. Not fireworks happy. The other kind. The kind where you drive home from a 12-hour inspection with your back locked up and you're still glad about the last 4 miles. It was the 14th of March when I saw the photograph. I wasn't snooping. I want that on the record, because later on people are going to assume I was that kind of husband, and I wasn't. It came up on the shared tablet in the kitchen while I was looking for a recipe with my hands full of onion. Her account. Her post. 14 hours old and 400 and some likes. Renata on the break room couch at her office. Legs across another man's lap, head tucked into the hollow of his shoulder, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Fully clothed. Nothing you couldn't show at a church picnic. His hand was closed around her ankle, comfortable, the way you hold something you've held 100 times before. The caption said, "My work husband gets me." I stood there with onion on my hands and read those 5 words maybe 9 times. Not the picture, the words. Because here's the thing about my line of work. I don't panic at the sight of a crack. Cracks are everywhere. What I look for is the direction it's traveling. His name was Tobias. 36, worked under her, had been on her team about 2 years. I met him twice. Firm handshake, good teeth, one of those men who repeats your name back to you like he read it in a book somewhere. She got home at 7:40. I'd made the dinner. I want you to know I still made the dinner. I waited until she'd set her bag down and taken her shoes off, and then I turned the tablet around on the counter so it faced her, and I asked her, level as I could, what I was supposed to do with that. She didn't flinch. I mean, that's the part that stayed with me. A person who's been caught does something with their face, a half second where the muscles have to decide what to be. Renata's face didn't decide anything. It was already decided. She said it was platonic. She said Tobias was the only person in that whole building who understood the pressure she was under. She said, and I'm quoting her, "We share a brain." I said a married woman calling another man, her husband in public, is a strange kind of platonic. And she looked at me and said, "If you can't understand a friendship like that, Hollis, that's your insecurity." It isn't my integrity. Hi. I've heard people fight for 30 years. Job sites, union halls, my own first marriage falling apart in slow motion. When a person is defending themselves in the moment, they stumble. They repeat. They reach for the wrong word and back up and take another run at it. That sentence didn't do any of that. It came out clean. Balanced. Like a line she'd said before, out loud, to somebody, somewhere. I didn't have a name for that feeling yet. I just knew the sound was wrong. A good weld rings. That one thudded. Real quick, if this story's got a hold of you already, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It genuinely helps more than you know. So, where was I? I did what I have done at every failing structure I've ever been sent to look at. I stopped arguing about whether there was a problem and started measuring it. Because you cannot win an argument with somebody who has rewritten the dictionary. She wasn't lying to me. That's what made it impossible. In her language, that photograph was innocent, and every word I had for what it actually was, the word husband, the word intimacy, the word mine, she had already redefined into something small and embarrassing that only a jealous man would reach for. So I stopped explaining. I stood in my own kitchen with the food going cold, and I quit trying to make her see it. And I think she believed that meant I'd come around. Nothing falls all at once. That's the thing people never understand about bridges. It stops holding a little at a time, for years, and nobody notices. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, somebody puts weight on it. She went up to bed around 10, left me the dishes, which was normal, and left her work tote on the kitchen chair, which was also normal. I moved it so I could sweep. That's all. I lifted it by the strap and the side pocket sagged open, and a folded index card slid out onto the floor by my boot. Getting colored. Folded twice, soft at the creases, the way paper gets when it's been handled a lot over a long time. I unfolded it. Her handwriting. That hard slant she gets when she's writing fast. It said, Rule 3, nothing in writing. And underneath it, in the corner in the same blue ink, was a date. January the 8th. 14 months earlier. 14 months before that photograph was ever taken. Rule 3 of what? I stood in that kitchen for a long time with the card open in my hand, and every instinct I had was telling me to walk up those stairs and put it in front of her face. I didn't. I folded it back along the exact creases it came with. You can feel a paper's memory, it wants to go back the way it was, and I slid it into the side pocket of her tote at the same angle it had been sitting. Then I finished the dishes, and I turned off the porch light myself for the first time in 5 years. Then I went out to the truck, opened the toolbox in the bed, and took out a fresh orange notebook. Number 62. I wrote the date at the top. I wrote the weather on the second line, 38 degrees, wet, wind out of the northwest. And on the third line, I wrote one honest sentence, the way I've done it for 26 years. Something in this house is carrying load it wasn't designed for. Here's what most people get wrong. They think an inspection is about proving something's broken. It isn't. It's about establishing a baseline, and then coming back and measuring the change. One crack tells you nothing. The same crack, 6 weeks later, a quarter-inch longer, tells you everything. So I stopped asking questions out loud, and I started keeping a record. The phone came first. It had always just been a phone, face up on the counter, on the arm of the couch, on the bathroom shelf while she did her hair. Sometime that spring, it stopped being furniture and started being an organ. Face down. Always face down. Screen against the wood like it was keeping warm. She changed the passcode in April. I know because she opened it in front of me one morning and I watched her thumb move in a shape I didn't recognize, and she felt me watching, and she turned her shoulder maybe 2 inches. 2 inches. Nothing you could ever bring up in an argument. She started taking it into the bathroom. She started taking it out to the garden she never weeded. Once I came around the corner of the house looking for the hose key, and she was standing by the fence with her back to me, laughing at something in her hand, and when she heard my boots on the gravel, she didn't hang up. She just lowered the phone against her thigh and kept it there, warm, waiting until I went back inside. That's the part nobody tells you about. It isn't the lying. It's watching somebody you love get very, very good at a small physical motion that only exists because of you. Notebook 62, April the 2nd, phone face down 9 of 9 observations. April the 9th, charges it in the guest room now. Says the outlet by the bed hums. That outlet does not hum. I wired that outlet. Now, the date on that card had been sitting in the back of my head like a stone in a boot. The January the 8th, 14 months back. And this is where I have to tell you the one genuinely useful thing about being married to a man who never throws anything away. I went down to the basement on a Saturday while she was at a spin class, and I pulled notebook 54 off the shelf. 14 months back put me 2/3 of the way through it. Deck rehab on a county bridge over the Sandusky, 11 spans. A bad expansion joint I'd flagged twice. January the 8th was there. Did at the top. Weather on the second line, 9 degrees, black ice on the approach. And down at the bottom of the page, in my own handwriting, in the place where I sometimes put a line about home, 4 words I had completely forgotten writing. R. Home 2040 AM. I sat down on the basement steps. I remembered that night the second I saw the ink. She told me a vendor dinner in Columbus ran long, that there was freezing rain on 71, that she'd almost gotten a room. I remembered being glad she made it back. I remembered the cold coming off her coat when she got into bed. 14 months. That photograph in March hadn't been the beginning of anything. It had been an anniversary. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy for me to make her into a monster, and she wasn't one. I knew exactly what Tobias was giving her, and I knew it because I'd watched her not get it for years. Renata had been passed over 3 times at that company. I sat with her through all 3. The third one, a logistics director role she'd built the entire proposal for, went to a man who called her kiddo in meetings. She came home that night and stood in the kitchen with her coat still on and said, very quietly, that she was tired of being the person who does the work and gets thanked in the second paragraph. And I said the wrong thing. I said, "You know what you're worth." I meant it as comfort. What she heard was, "So it shouldn't bother you." Tobias never made that mistake. Tobias thought out loud with her. He asked her questions in rooms full of men, the way she'd once asked me what the river does to a pier. He made her the smartest person in the building, out loud, in public, on a couch, with his hand around her ankle. Before I go on, I want to know what you'd have done at that basement step. Confront her right then, or keep the record and wait? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read everyone. The dinner was the 26th of April. Her team had landed a system-wide contract with a 4-hospital network, $4.1 million over 3 years, the biggest thing she'd ever put her name on. She'd earned it. I want that said plainly. She had earned every dollar of it, and I was proud of her in a way I hadn't found the words for yet. Steakhouse out on the east side, private room, 11 people, white tablecloths, and that low amber light those places use, so everybody looks better than they are. I wore the gray jacket. I got my hair cut. I brought her the good pen, a heavy one, brass, engraved on the barrel, because she'd signed the contract with a hotel ballpoint, and I thought she deserved better for the next one. She loved it. She held it up and made everybody look, and for about 90 seconds I was just a husband at a table, glad. Then Tobias sat down across from her, and the language changed. I don't mean they flirted. Nobody touched anybody. It was smaller, and it was worse. She'd start a sentence about the implementation timeline, and he'd finish it, and she'd laugh and say the 14th floor, and he'd say don't, and both of them would come apart laughing while 9 other people at that table smiled politely at a joke that had happened somewhere none of us were. It went on for 2 hours. The Tuesday thing. Our friend with the clipboard. You know what she said? Every one of them a door with no handle on my side. I've stood on riverbanks in 4 states. That's exactly what it was like. Watching 2 people out in the current, deep and easy, and me on the shore with dry boots, waving. I did what I do. I put my knuckle against the underside of the table and tapped it twice, quiet, the way I do a girder, and listened to what came back. Real quick, because I know this one's a slow burn, if you're still here with me, a like and a subscribe would honestly mean a lot. All right. Around 9, Tobias stood up with his glass. He gave a good toast, and I hated that it was good. He said Renata had rebuilt a broken bid from the ground up in 9 days. He said she'd taken the meeting nobody wanted to take. He said the network had signed because of her, and everyone at that table knew it, and 11 people raised their glasses, and so did I. Then he looked at her, only her, and lowered his voice about half a step, the way you do when a line is meant for one person in a crowded room. He said, and we did it without breaking a single one of them. Renata's laugh stopped. Not loudly. It just went out like a pilot light. Her eyes came up over the rim of her glass, not at him. Got me. She held that look for maybe 2 seconds, and then she smiled and drank and turned to the woman on her left and asked about her son's baseball season, and the table closed over the moment like water over a dropped stone. Nobody else in that room heard anything. I'm sure of it. 11 people, and to 10 of them, it was a nice line at the end of a nice toast. But I've spent 26 years listening to what comes back off a tap, and I know the difference between a man making a joke and a man quoting something. Without breaking a single one of them. Them. Plural, garden. There was a list of them, and I was holding number 3 in a tote bag in my kitchen. I drove us home. She talked the whole way about the implementation calendar and the 14th floor server closet, and I said the right things in the right places, and at a red light on Dorset I counted the seconds of the silence between 2 of her sentences. 9. I don't know why I do that. I've done it since I was a boy. That night I wrote in Notebook 62, Rule 3 is not the only rule. Confirmed by T, 4:26, 9:07 p.m., in front of witnesses who did not know they were witnesses. And here's where the second thing started, the part she never saw, because she'd stopped looking at me sometime in the winter. I began verifying. Not spying. I want to be exact about this, because it matters to me. I never touched her phone. I never read a message. I never followed a car. I didn't need to. Everything I ever learned came from things she handed me herself, or things a public record hands anybody who bothers to ask. I made 3 columns in the back of the notebook. What she told me, what was verifiable, and the delta. That's the word we use for the difference between the drawing and the structure. The delta. Every bridge has one. The question is only ever how big. May the 2nd. She told me she was at a 2-day vendor summit in Cleveland, hotel by the airport. Fine. Except the hotel called our landline on the 3rd to confirm a card on file, and the woman read out a reservation for 1 room, 1 night, checked out at 6:15 in the morning. 2-day summit. 1 night. Delta. May the 11th. Late again, 10:40, and she came in with her hair damp from rain that had stopped at 4 in the afternoon. Right? I check weather for a living. It's the second line of every page I've written for 26 years. May the 19th, a Sunday. She left a receipt in the pocket of the jeans I put through the wash. I dry them on the line. I go through the pockets. I've always gone through the pockets. A steakhouse in Bexley. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine. 4:40 in the afternoon on a day she'd told me she was helping her sister move a couch. Her sister lives in Fort Wayne. I didn't call her. I didn't want to make her lie for somebody. Every one of them went in the notebook. Date, weather, 1 honest sentence. No adjectives. I have never once in my life written an adjective in a field notebook, and I wasn't about to start because it was my own house. If this story's holding you, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, leave a like. It's the whole reason I can keep making these. Now, where was I? June came and she started thanking me. That's the part I still can't fully explain to people. I'd gone quiet, no more questions, no more tablet turned around on the counter, and she read that silence as growth. As a man finally getting his head straight. She said it in the kitchen one Thursday morning, toast burning, blaming the toaster. She said, I really appreciate how much you've matured about all this, Hollis. She said it warmly. She meant it as a gift. My wife thanked me for being numb. And I stood there and said, "You're welcome." The perfume was the next week. She keeps two. There's the everyday one, something clean out of a white bottle. And there's the other one, dark glass, square stopper, the one I bought her in Charleston on our 2nd anniversary. That one has a job. That one is for a table with a candle on it. I was carrying her bag out to the car for an overnight in Toledo. A work trip, one night, contractor walkthrough, and the bag rolled sideways on the step and I heard glass knock against glass inside it. Date night perfume. For a warehouse in Toledo. At 7 in the morning. I set the bag in the trunk and I closed it and I told her to drive safe because there was a storm cell coming up out of Indiana and she takes 23 too fast in the rain. Then I went inside and moved my things into the guest room. Took 3 trips. 2 work shirts, the good jacket, the alarm clock, my reading glasses and notebooks 54 through 62 and a milk crate. That was the whole of it. 5 years of marriage fit in 3 trips, and I remember thinking that was either very sad or very efficient and being too tired to decide which. I want you to understand what I expected. I expected a fight. I expected her to come home the next day, see the empty side of the closet, and finally, feel the ground move under her. She came home. She saw it. And her shoulders came down. She said, "Honestly, I think this is healthy for us." I said nothing. And she said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to give me space." There it was. The delta, not a crack anymore, a gap you could put your whole hand into. She wasn't grieving the distance between us. She was relieved by it. I had been the last piece of load-bearing structure in her life she still had to work around, and I just stepped aside, and she thanked me for the room. I slept in that guest room for 4 months. Twin bed, bad box spring, a water stain on the ceiling shaped like Michigan. I got up at 4:40, made my own coffee, and went and looked at bridges. And on the 11th of October, I put on a clean shirt and drove to a restaurant on 5th to meet my wife for our 5th anniversary. I'd made the reservation in July. Corner table. I'd taken the lake house dates off the calendar back in the spring. I'm not a fool, but I still wanted the dinner. 5 years is 5 years. I brought the box with the bracelet in it. Thin gold, small enough she could wear it to work. I got there at 6:40 for a 7 o'clock. The waiter poured water twice. At 7:20, I texted her. At 7:50, she called. There was noise behind her. Not restaurant noise. A car, moving, wipers going. She said Tobias was spiraling. She said his girlfriend had blindsided him, and he was in a parking garage, and she couldn't leave him like that, and she was so sorry, and she'd make it up to me, and she loved me. I asked her one question. I asked her if she'd remembered what day it was before or after she got in the car. The line went quiet, and I counted. 6 seconds. I paid for the water. I put the box back in my coat. I drove home in the rain and sat in the driveway with the engine off, and the porch light wasn't on because I'd been turning it off myself since March. She came in at 12:40. I was in the kitchen with the light over the stove on, and she stopped in the doorway with her coat still buttoned, and when she said my name, I could smell it on her from 8 feet away. Scotch. Peaty, smoky, the expensive kind you can taste in the air. My wife has never in her life drunk scotch. She takes vodka with soda and complains about the ice. But I'd shaken that man's hand at a steakhouse in April and smelled the exact same thing coming off his glass. She hung her coat on the hook by the door and asked me why I was sitting in the dark. I told her the light over the stove was on. She said that wasn't what she meant. And then she did the thing I'd been waiting 5 years to see her do, and it turned out I didn't want to see it after all. She crossed the kitchen, put her hand flat on the counter between us, and said, steady, sober, looking right at me, "I know how tonight looks." But nothing happened. I need you to believe me. And the awful part is that I did. I believed her completely. That was never the thing I couldn't survive. I asked her how Tobias was doing. She said he was better. She said he needed somebody who understood him. I said, "That's what I used to be for you." And she said, "That's different, Hollis. You're my husband." She meant it kindly. "That's what I need you to sit with for a second." She said it the way you'd explain something obvious to a man who'd had a long day, that a husband is one category of person and the one who understands you is a different category entirely, and that a reasonable woman keeps one of each. Somewhere in the last 5 years, in a language I never learned, I had been promoted out of the job I actually wanted. I went up to the guest room. She went up to ours. And at 4:40 the next morning, I got in the truck and drove 90 minutes to a county road in Wyandotte to look at a 2-span steel girder bridge with a bad west bearing. I want to tell you about that bridge because it's the only way I know how to explain the next 4 weeks. It was built in 1964. Somewhere in the 80s, the west abutment settled about 1.5 inches. Not a failure, 1.5 inches over 20 years is nothing. But when the deck lost that inch, everything above it went looking for another way to carry the load. The steel found a path. It always does. It just wasn't the path the engineer drew. By the time I got there in 2019, that bridge was standing up fine. It was carrying school buses. And every single pound of it was going through a member that was never designed to take a pound of anything. Nobody driving over it would ever have known. It didn't sag. It didn't groan. It looked exactly like a bridge. I flagged it, and the county fought me for 11 months, and in the spring of 2020, that member let go on a Tuesday morning with a gravel truck on the deck. Nobody died. It was close. So, when I say I knew what I was living in, understand, I wasn't guessing. I'd written the report on it. The retreat was the first weekend of November. Company thing, up in the Alleghenies, a lodge on a lake with cabins around it. Partners invited. She'd asked me back in September in a tone that said no was the correct answer, and I'd said yes, and she'd been surprised, and I'd watched her be surprised. I had a reason. I'd been carrying that index card for 11 days by then. I'd taken it out of her tote for good on the 24th of October, and she had never once looked for it, which told me something all by itself. Rule 3. Nothing in writing. I wanted to see the other rules operating. Not on paper. In a room. Quick favor before we get to that lodge. If you've made it this far with me, hit subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely keeps this channel alive. All right. The drive up was 4.5 hours. She took a call for 2 of them, on speaker, about the 14th floor. I drove. The leaves were done in the high country, all that gray-brown you get in November, and there was a smell of wet ash in the air that whole weekend that I still can't get out of my head. Friday night was a dinner in the main hall. Saturday was breakout sessions and something called a trust exercise on the lawn. Saturday night was the fire. Here's what I did all weekend. I stood at the edges and I listened. And what I learned in 36 hours was worse than anything I could have found on her phone. Nobody thought they were doing anything wrong. That's what got me. A woman from procurement asked me, friendly, no malice, making conversation over a coffee urn, whether I was Tobias's Renata's husband. That's the construction she used. She heard herself say it and it didn't catch on anything on the way out. A younger man asked if I was the one who fixes bridges, and when I said yes, he said, "Oh, that's right," and looked at me for a second too long with something I couldn't name until later that night. It was sympathy. That man was being kind to me. 40 people at that lodge, and I was the only one still working off the old map. Saturday, around 8, they built a fire in the pit by the water. Somebody brought out a guitar, which is exactly as bad as you'd expect. People got blankets. The lake was black and flat, and the air had gone cold enough to see your breath. I stayed up on the deck of the main hall, above them, with a cup of coffee, because I don't drink, and because, from up there, you can see the whole thing at once. Tobias sat down on a log with a blanket over his shoulder. He didn't call to her. He didn't look for her. He just opened one side of that blanket, once, without turning his head. And my wife crossed 30 feet of grass and folded herself into it. Legs across his lap. Head in the hollow of his shoulder. His hand closed around her ankle. Yo! The exact photograph, down to the angle of her chin. Except this time there were 40 people around that fire and not one of them turned around. Not one. Nobody nudged anybody. Nobody's conversation stopped. A woman refilled a wine glass 6 feet away and stepped over his boots to do it. It wasn't a secret. It had never been a secret. It was the arrangement, and everybody in that company had known about it long enough for it to get boring. They weren't hiding an affair from a husband. They were being polite to the mistake. I stood on that deck and finished my coffee. I remember it going cold in my hands, and I remember being surprised that my hands were steady, and I remember thinking, very clearly, about the west abutment in Wyandotte County. The load had found another path. It had found it a long time ago. I was just the last man standing on the deck who hadn't been told. It started raining around 9, that thin, cold November rain that doesn't fall so much as hang. People made noise and grabbed blankets and went inside. I walked down the steps and past the fire and out along the gravel road toward the cabins, and the rain came through my shirt in about a minute, and I stopped in the middle of that road and stood there. And I took the first clean breath I'd taken since March. I've thought about that a lot since. I wasn't heartbroken standing in that road. Heartbreak had been the last 8 months, all that hoping and measuring and waiting for the tap to ring true. What I felt out there was the thing that comes after you finally write the report. Certainty. That's all. Just the quiet of not having to wonder anymore. Before I tell you about the next morning, I want your honest opinion. At that fire, in front of 40 people, what would you have done? Walked over? Said something? Or walked out into the rain like I did? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. I slept 4 hours in a cabin that smelled like cedar and mothballs. She came in around 1 and got into the other bed without a word, and she was asleep in about 90 seconds, which is a thing only a person with a clear conscience can do. At 6:15, she got up in the dark, put on leggings and a fleece, and told me she was doing the sunrise hike up the ridge trail. Team thing. Back by 9:30. I said, "Have a good time." The door closed. I lay there and listened to 2 sets of footsteps go past the cabin window on the gravel, and one of them laughed at something, and then it was quiet. I got up. I made the bed I'd slept in. I don't know why, but I did. And then I took my bag out of the closet and started packing. I had 2 hours and 15 minutes, a folded index card in my jacket pocket, and one thing left to do in that cabin that she was not going to find until she got back. I've packed a bag in a hurry maybe 400 times in my life. Call-outs at 2 in the morning, a scour inspection after a flood, a bridge strike on the interstate. You learn to do it in a sequence so you never forget the one thing you'll need at midnight. I didn't do it that way. I took my time. I folded every shirt on that bed like I was putting it away for a season. And when I got to the small zip pocket where I keep my reading glasses, my hand found the index card, and I sat down on the edge of the mattress and opened it one more time. Rule 3. Nothing in writing. January the 8th. Here's what I had figured out by then, standing in the rain the night before. That card wasn't a note to herself. Nobody writes a rule down on an index card for their own benefit. You just remember it. That was a card from a conversation. 2 people at a table somewhere, deciding on terms. And a woman doesn't keep a card like that in her bag for 14 months because she's forgetful. She keeps it because it means something to her. Because it was the night something got agreed. What I still didn't know was what the other rules said. Or how many there were. Or, and this is the one that kept me up, which of them was about me. I put the card back in my jacket. Then I went to the desk by the window, and I took out one of my field forms. I don't use pretty paper. I've carried the same yellow duplicate forms in the truck since the 90s, the kind with the carbon backing, so whatever you write, you keep a copy of what you wrote. Habit. 26 years of it. I sat down at that desk with the lake going gray outside the window, and I wrote her 2 lines. You didn't need a husband. You needed an audience. And I'm tired of watching. That's all. No name at the bottom. No explanation. 26 years of writing one honest sentence a day teaches you when you've already said the thing. I tore off the top copy and left the carbon in the pad. Then I took off my wedding ring. It's a plain band. No engraving, nothing on the inside. I'd wanted engraving, and she'd said it was tacky, and I'd let it go, the way you do. It came off harder than I expected. 5 years and a bad knuckle from a hammer in '09. I put the note on her pillow, squared to the edge of the case. And I set the ring on top of it, dead center, holding it down. And that was it. That was the whole ceremony. I carried my bag out at 7:50 in the morning. Nobody was up but the kitchen staff and a man in a windbreaker hauling firewood, and he nodded at me and I nodded back, and neither of us said anything. The truck started on the first turn, the way it always does. Real quick, if this story has stayed with you this long, please hit subscribe and leave a like. It's how these stories reach people who need them. All right. 4.5 hours back. And I have been trying for 6 years to describe that drive honestly, and the closest I can get is this. I kept waiting for it to hit me, and it never did. I stopped at a diner on 30 outside Bucyrus. Biz by the window, black coffee, eggs over medium. I ate the whole plate. I hadn't finished a meal since April. Somewhere around 11, the phone started. She called at 11,004, 11,000 any, 11, and then it stopped for 2 hours, and then it started again at 1:15 and went in a pattern I recognized, not panic. Escalation. The rhythm of a person working a problem. I let it ring. Not out of cruelty. I just didn't have anything to say that wasn't already sitting on her pillow with a ring on top of it. The text came in at 2040 in the afternoon. I read it at a light on Broad Street. You're being dramatic. Nothing happened. Come back and we'll talk about this like adults. Nothing happened. She'd have passed a polygraph on it. I went to the house on Cresswell, and I moved out over the next 6 days, and I did it the way I do everything. I made an inventory. 2 pages, itemized, in the back of notebook 62. What I brought into the marriage, what we bought together, what I was leaving. I left the couch, the table, the good chairs. I took the truck, my tools, my books, the milk crate of notebooks, and a cast iron pan that was my father's. The last thing I did before I locked the door was get down on the kitchen floor with a flashlight and look at the underside of that table. Our initials were still there, scratched in with the all the morning we got married. Nobody would ever see them. I left them. They weren't mine to take. I got an apartment on the Near East Side, 2nd floor, $110 a month less than my half of that mortgage. Bad radiator, good light. I bought a bed, a lamp, a kitchen table with 1 chair, and a cheap black umbrella from the drugstore on the corner that turned inside out the first time I used it. And then I did the last piece of work. Because here's what a marriage actually is, underneath all of it. It is a load path. 2 people carrying a structure, a mortgage, a title, a retirement account, a name on a card in a wallet, and when one of them steps out from under it, somebody has to know exactly what was carrying what. My attorney's name was Gordon. 60-something, corduroy jacket, an office above a shoe repair place with a window unit that rattled. Somebody at the district office had used him for a divorce in 2016 and said he wasn't fast, but he was thorough. I brought him a banker's box. Notebooks 54 through 62. The 3-column ledger, what she told me, what was verifiable, the delta. The hotel confirmation. The steakhouse receipt from Bexley. The carbon copy of the note. Every joint statement since the refinance, tabbed. He put his glasses up on his head and went through it for about 40 minutes without saying one word. Then he looked up and said, "Hollis, I've been doing this 31 years. I have never had a client walk in here with an inspection report on his own marriage." I said it's the only way I know how to look at anything. And then Gordon asked me the question that changed the next 6 months. He said, "This ledger of yours. You wrote down what she told you every time, with the date." He tapped the page. "Do you understand what this is?" I said it's a record. He said, "No. It's a pattern. And patterns are the only thing anybody in a courthouse actually believes." I want to be careful here because I know what a story like this is supposed to do next, and I'm not going to do it. I wasn't building a case to destroy her. Ohio's a no-fault state. I wasn't going after her income, and I wasn't going after her career, and Gordon will tell you I turned down 2 things he suggested. All I wanted was the house sold, the debt split down the middle, and my name off a life I wasn't living in anymore. But there was one thing I asked him about. One thing I couldn't let go of. I put the index card on his desk. Cream-colored, folded twice, soft at the creases. Rule 3, nothing in writing. The January the 8th. I told him I didn't know what it meant. I told him I'd carried it since October, and I'd read it 300 times, and I still didn't know. Gordon looked at it for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He turned it over. I'd looked at the back of that card 100 times. There was nothing on it. Blank cream cardstock, both sides. I'd have sworn to it in front of a judge. But Gordon held it up against the window with the winter light behind it, and there, pressed into the paper, indented but never inked, the ghost of what somebody had written on the card above it in a stack, were 4 more lines. 4 more rules. And a 5th line under them that wasn't a rule at all. Gordon didn't hand it back to me. He set it flat on the desk blotter, turned his lamp on its side so the light came across it almost level, and told me not to touch it with my thumb. It's an old trick. Any cop who ever worked a burglary in 1978 knows it. You press hard enough with a pen, and the 2 or 3 cards underneath keep a record of it forever, whether you meant them to or not. Rule 1. No apologies. We haven't done anything. Rule 2 was fainter. The pen had lifted. Never in the same car twice in a week. Rule 4. If anyone asks, we're each other's work spouse. Say it first. Say it loud. Say it first. Say it loud. That caption on the photograph in March, the one I read 9 times with onion on my hands, hadn't been a slip. It was Rule 4, executed correctly. A public confession is the best hiding place there is, because a thing you announce to 400 people can't possibly be the thing you're hiding. And underneath the 4, in the same hard slant, was the 5th line. Not numbered. Just written. He'll never look up. He's not built for it. Gordon asked me if I was all right. I said I was fine. I asked him for a photocopy, and he made me 2, and I put one in the milk crate and one in notebook 62, and I drove home in the dark. I sat at that kitchen table with one chair for a long time that night. And what got me wasn't Rule 1, or 4, or the 14 months. It was that last line. Because she wasn't being cruel when she wrote it. She was being accurate. That's what a rule is. A thing you write down because you've observed it to be reliable. She had watched me for years and concluded that I was a man who does not look up. And she was right. I hadn't looked up. Not until March. The house sold in February. $341,000, closed in 11 days, and after the payoff and the fees, there was about $29,000 in equity that we split down the middle without a single argument. Gordon was almost disappointed. If you're still with me here at the end, please hit subscribe and leave a like. It matters more than you'd think. All right. The signing was the 14th of May, a Wednesday, in a conference room on the 4th floor of Gordon's building with a window unit rattling in the next office. 6 months and 8 days since I walked out of that lodge. I got there first. I'd come straight from a job, deck rehab out on the river, and I still had a little dried epoxy on 2 knuckles that wouldn't come off with soap. She came in at 10 past 10, and I'm going to be honest with you about what I saw because I don't get anything out of dressing it up. She looked tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. She'd cut her hair short. Her hands didn't know where to be. She put them on the table, then in her lap, then around a paper cup of water she never drank from. The attorneys did their part. 14 pages, tabbed, initial here, sign there. It took 19 minutes. And when the lawyers stepped out to copy the last page, she said my name. She said she missed me. She said the apartment she'd taken had bad water pressure, and she couldn't sleep in it. She said she'd been carrying something around for 6 months, and if she didn't say it out loud today, she'd never get to. She said, "I never slept with him, Hollis." Not once. Not one single time. I never crossed the line. And then she looked at me like she'd just handed me something that was going to change everything. I asked her how Tobias was. It took her a second. She said he'd gone back to his girlfriend in January. They'd gotten engaged in March. He'd asked Renata to sit at his table at the company dinner, and she'd said no, and he'd said that was probably for the best, and that had been the whole conversation. She said the last time she saw him alone was a Thursday night in the office, past 9, both of them working late. She'd ordered them Thai food. He took a call at 92D, said something about being late, and put his coat on. And she sat in a dark office on the 14th floor with 2 containers of cold takeout, and she said that was when she understood what she'd traded. I didn't say anything for a while. I counted the seconds. Galaben. Then I told her the truth, and I told it to her gently, because there wasn't one thing left in me that wanted to hurt her. I said, "I believe you. I've believed you since the night you came home smelling like his scotch. You never crossed the line. That was never the thing." I said, "Sex is just mechanics, Renata. It's the cheap part. Anybody can give that away in a bad hour and get most of it back. What you gave him was the other thing, the laughing at something before it's finished, the shorthand, the being understood in a room full of people. That's intimacy. That's the load-bearing member. And that one does not grow back." I said, "You could have had both. You just picked the wrong one to protect." She started to cry, and she didn't make any noise doing it, and I sat with her while she did. I didn't reach across the table. I want to be honest, I thought about it. My hand actually moved about 2 inches on that tabletop. Then I asked her the only question I had left. I took the photocopy out of my jacket and slid it across. 4 indented lines and a 5th that wasn't a rule. She read it, and I watched her face do the thing it hadn't done in my kitchen in March. The muscles finally had to decide what to be. She said, "That was the 8th of January. In the parking garage, at Bass." I told him it had to have rules or I couldn't do it at all. She put her fingers on the paper. The rules were how I told myself it wasn't happening. I asked about the last line. She said very quietly, "I wrote that one to make myself feel safe. And then I read it about 100 times to make myself feel less guilty." I said, "I know. That's why I never showed it to a judge." The attorneys came back with the last page. I signed. She signed. Somebody's pen was out of ink, and Gordon lent her his, and that's the small, stupid detail I remember most clearly out of the whole morning. It was raining when I came out onto 5th. Steady, warm May rain, the kind that gets the gutters running. I had a new umbrella. Navy blue, wooden handle, $22 at a hardware store on the corner. I'd been carrying it in the truck for 3 weeks, waiting for a day like that one. I stopped under the awning and put it up, and I looked back through the glass door into the lobby for about 2 seconds. She was still at that table, and her phone was face up in front of her, face up now, all the time, nothing left to guard, and it lit up, and I watched her read it, and I watched her shoulders come down the way they had the day I moved into the guest room. I found out later what it said. She told me, months after, in the only other conversation we ever had. It was Tobias. It said, "Hey, need a favor? Can you look at something for me before Monday?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry." A favor. Before Monday. 5 years of a marriage, 14 months of rules, 1 photograph on a couch, and at the end of all of it, she was sitting alone in a courthouse lobby being asked to look at something before Monday. I walked out into it, and I'm going to tell you what it feels like because I think somebody watching needs to hear it. It doesn't feel like winning. There's no moment where the music comes up. It feels like the first hour after you finally file a report you've been sitting on, quiet, and a little bit hollow, and yours. I'm 57 now. I still inspect bridges. I'm on notebook 79. There's a woman named Delia who runs the front counter at the county garage, and about a year and a half ago, she asked me what the river does to appear in the spring, and I had to sit down in my truck for a minute afterward. We've been together 4 years this fall. She burns toast too. I've stopped saying anything about the toaster. And I'll tell you the last thing. 2 summers ago, I got down on the floor of Delia's kitchen with a marking awl, and I scratched our initials into the underside of her table where nobody will ever see them. I've spent my whole life caring about the parts nobody looks at, because those are the parts that hold. She found them about a week later, dropped a spoon, went under after it, came up with her eyes full. She'd looked up. That's all any of it ever was. Somebody has to look up. If this story stayed with you, and you'd like to hear more true-to-life stories of quiet betrayal and hard-won peace, tap the video on your screen now. I'll be waiting for you there.